Jay Campbell!
There's no secret. There's no shortcut. Everything that is alive is conscious. Be silent, be still, and know God. Until you feel worthy, it ain't gonna happen. Rigorous, ruthless, disciplined focus. You have to get to a place where you can work on yourself. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, this is part 3 of the amazing podcast with Laura Knight-Jadczyk. Notice how I pronounced it correctly for the third time. 1 out of 3 is not bad. And of course, my good friend Hunter Williams is here. So we're just going to jump right into the topics. The first 2 episodes were quite profound. And now here we are in part 3. And obviously we're asking a lot of questions as it relates to her book series, The Wave, and then some of her other books, which she has many, from Paul to Mark, Paleo Christianity, of course. The other one, High Strangeness. So a lot of different books that she's written, and we're covering those. So I think today, to start, we want to talk about reality creation, because obviously the New Age has really mucked it up, right? I mean, they've, I know from like the great Neville Goddard, all of his books, the statement is, live as if the wish is fulfilled. And there are obviously many other New Age authors and, great writers who have talked about, that your thoughts create and control your reality. But you are probably the first person, at least in the writings that Hunter and I have encountered, that really said, well, there's some truth to it, but there's also some issues about it that you must understand. And, maybe you could go into that a little bit deeper than say the average New Age metaphysician does.
Oh boy. Okay. First thing.
Set you up perfect.
Yeah. I mean, like you just said, the guy you just quoted, live as though it, you're whatever it is you want exists. And there's been, I don't know how many books about, positive affirmations and,
right,
living your dream and so on and so forth. And the unfortunate thing is that with very rare exceptions, it doesn't work. Now, let me give you a kind of a sideways example here. My former mother-in-law, she's now deceased, was a great follower of the evangelist Jimmy Swaggart. I don't know if we're familiar with Jimmy Swaggart, but quite a character.
Jerry Falwell, part 2.
Yeah, and she would get him on the television, and he'd say, come up and put your hand on the screen and pray with me, and you're going to get a healing. Right? Well, she had a bum knee, and she did this one day when she was watching the television, and she swore that her knee was completely healed. Well, not very long afterwards, I think her knee was healed for maybe 2 years, and then Jimmy Swaggart got involved in a scandalous sexcapade and was exposed as being, not quite the righteous guy he pretended to be. And all of a sudden, she lost her healing. her fluid. And, that's kind of an example of what some people can with the power of their mind, establish and maintain some kind of a change in their life, as long as it's related to belief. But as a general rule, those people are rare. Usually, well, I shouldn't say they're rare. They're hypnotizable, like that are easily hypnotized. And if you've ever worked with hypnosis, then you know that, generally when you have an audience and you're using hypnosis, you test your audience, so you give them some commands and so forth, and you keep an eye on them to see who is best at following the command and who isn't, and then you don't pick on the one who isn't for your demonstration, because it's not going to go well. So, right. I mean, that's kind of like hypnosis 101. So there are people for whom reality can be changed fairly quickly because they, have this belief and it supports it. People who have big problems, serious problems. And those are, unfortunately, the people who really buy those kinds of books because they really have serious problems. They may have, poverty, they have illness, they have relationship problems, they have, a lot of serious problems. And they think that they're going to get themselves into a whole new life just by believing it to be so.
Mhm.
And at a certain point in time, I was very much involved with the New Age community in the Tampa area. And I had a lot of friends who were very much involved in it. And I had a lot of friends who were talking about this book, that book, the other, trying this, trying that. And, I watched, I observed, I listened, and I didn't see anybody's reality changing.
Mhm.
And then, of course, in my book, Secret History, I wrote about the reality changing problem. And there's a book, God, I forgot the name of it. But in any event, it was about changing reality with the power of your mind. And they had some experienced, heavy duty meditators they got in there, and they were really working. And what they managed to do at the end of this long process was to change the pH of a very small sample of water.
Mhm.
And that was all they were actually able to do. So, I mean, we don't necessarily use those kinds of experiences as our guidance. But here's another problem with creating your own reality. Say you want to create your own reality, you want to change something about your reality. The problem is, what part of you wants to do this and what part of you doesn't?
Right.
You are not, a unified individual if you haven't been crystallized on a solid foundation. One part of you is going to want it and cry and scream and carry on and, oh, I need it, I want it, I got to have it, and then it's not going to happen, and then you're going to just be kicking yourself in the behind because you're going to be saying, well, there's something wrong with me, I can't even create my, or da da da. And so that's another problem. Okay, first of all, you have to have some unification, and that only comes by self-work.
Mhm.
I mean, if you really seriously want to change your reality, okay? The other thing is you have to have knowledge. I mean, you can't just
Mhm.
you can't just tell the universe, what you want and expect to get it, because what if what you think you want is completely counter to the plans of, say, your higher self?
Mhm.
You violate the free will of someone else, you're going to get into a lot of problem there. So, well, we came up, and maybe it's easier to explain this by explaining the method that we use. Um, my daughters and I kind of came up with this plan or this method. And it came about because back when I was in a lot of physical therapy, I had to go to this therapeutic gym 3 times a week. And I would get on the treadmill. Now, I can't walk like walking down the street because I have a back injury that prevents it. But I can walk on a treadmill because I have handles to hold on to. And
Sure.
gives me back support. So I would get on this treadmill and I would close my eyes and walk. Walk with my eyes closed. I know that sounds counterintuitive, but I did. And I would start visualizing things. And I began to notice that things began to happen. And I realized that what was necessary was the generation of the energy that came about through the physical walking, because you're generating electricity if you're walking. But it was not done in like a directed way. It was more like in a floating, daydreaming kind of way. Okay. So there came a time when we needed something, and we needed something very specific. And I'll tell you, it was a house. We needed a house, a very specific house to house all of us here.
Sure.
And my daughter says, "Well, Mom, why don't you try that thing?" And I said, "All right." I said, "I'll try it." And I said, "You guys have to help me out." So we set the treadmill up, and we put this big giant crystal in a bowl of water there on the floor in front of the treadmill. And we got on the treadmill, and the thing was I know from my experience as a hypnotherapist what not to do when you're making suggestions, because you don't make directed suggestions to somebody that limit their options. You don't lead them. If somebody needs to be happy, then what you do is you have them see themselves as happy. You don't
Right.
tell them how they're going to be happy. You don't tell them how they're going to get there, because the universe does that. And if you don't let the universe do it, and you're going to be, kind of going against the universe. So we got on this treadmill, and we just we visualized ourselves congratulating each other for finding the perfect house. That's it. That was the extent of the visualization. And we, would put that visualization into that crystal. That was just kind of like an added thing. I'm not going to guarantee anything about the crystal. You may not even need it, but that was kind of like an added thing for me, because as far as I could see, once you stopped the treadmill, the crystal can continue generating the thought while you're doing something else. So we were all doing that, and it must have been, I don't know, 10 days to 2 weeks. And we found the perfect house. And I mean, it was perfect, and the situation was perfect that we were able to acquire it. I mean, like within 2 weeks, we were moving in. So, that's a whole other thing. But that little example is what I mean by when you want to create or change your own reality, you can't decide what it is specifically that you want or need. Because if you do, and if you're, say it's $1 million, I want $1 million, and say your higher self, i.e., universe or whatever, has it in mind that you have a karmic debt to pay, or you need to learn a lesson, or you are there suffering your situation because somebody else is supposed to interact with you at some point in the not too distant future to take you out of that situation. Any number of possibilities exist for why you are there, in addition to just the ordinary situation. And so the thing is to find the most general thing that you can think of, which is, being happy. I mean, you can sometimes get a little more specific about things. You can, like, for example, a house. But in that, you don't even specify the house. You don't specify where it is, anything about it. It's just that you see you and the people involved being happy and congratulating that you've had success. That's it. You make it as general as you can, because whenever you anticipate something, and this is something that C's kind of made pretty clear, when you anticipate, you block the possibility of something manifesting in your life.
To that point, I want to say, in my earlier life, because I've always been, and I think most people do this, especially directed, driven people, but it was always had to be a specific way. And it was like bullet points, bullet points, bullet points, bullet points. And so once I realized that it was more about, as what you've just discussed, the conscious awareness that I see it, I don't know how it's going to happen, but I know it's going to happen. I'm going to keep working. I'm going to do my inner work. I'm going to meditate. I'm going to do all these things. And at some point, I'm going to create that reality, but it's not going to be specific. That has been a dramatic revelation for me in my life in just the last like 6 to 7 to 8 years. Because as soon as I gave up and let go of the finite things that had to happen, it started to happen a lot more. And so I 100% agree with you. I mean, I've seen this in my own conscious life, that it really does come down to just having an idea that if I work towards it, and again, I work on myself, these things can happen, but they're not going to happen as exactly the way that I anticipate them being.
Well, there's also got to be, there's another factor that's involved. I mean, in addition to doing your soft visualizing, which is, general, and, I add the energy to it, by walking on the treadmill, or you could do a bicycle if you wanted to, or pump iron, I don't know, whatever. there also has to be active input on your part in the physical realm. You have to keep your eyes open. You have to be putting signals out there to the universe, that you're open to something. I mean, if we weren't looking on a real estate website, we would never have found it, right? So, I mean, you can't just sit there and wait for somebody to come to your door and knock on it and say, "Here, I have the house for you." I mean, that's not going to happen. You got to physically do something to
Right.
get it. Now, the interesting thing about this is that it's part of the whole philosophical underpinning of what the C's have talked about. That in a sense we are all one, but not in the easy way people like to think. I mean, it's not like it's there are laws, there are rules, and there are levels of being, and you can't assume the position of God when you're not anywhere near that level and you have nowhere near that much knowledge. That's something you don't want to do, because all that's going to do is bring, heartache and grief into your life. So about creating your own reality, just think of all the people who read the books and it says all you got to do is take these little affirmations up around your mirror all day, or you say it over and over again and it'll happen. And they tell these wonderful stories about how somebody was doing that, and then they got on the bus and somebody came up to them on the bus and gave them what they needed, or gave them the whatever they needed. And so they make it sound like it's totally easy, and people unfortunately believe it that way.
Yeah.
And then that's the way they go about it. And the only person who's changing their reality is the person who's writing the book and making money. The other thing is they actually did do something. They wrote a book and they got it published and put it out there to change their reality to make more money. But they don't impart that part of the formula, to the reader, who is just left with, well, I've got to visualize, and I've got to recite my mantras, and I've got to do my affirmations, and so on and so forth. I mean, like Louise Hay, I keep this little book in my desk drawer.
My wife has the app. They eliminated the app. We literally live that. We have the same thing, Laura. We live by that book. It's amazing. It's literally an amazing book.
The thing is well, she's got affirmations in there, and the affirmations are very useful because they help you identify what your problem might be.
That's right.
You have to do more than just repeat the affirmations to get a handle on it. You have to do some work. You have to do some research. You have to find out what your belief center is. And in the esoteric tradition, the belief center is like there's two bodies. You're side by side, and each one has three centers, and they're represented by a circle. So imagine two boxes side by side with three circles in them. The one is the intellectual center, the emotional center, and then the moving center, or the sexual center, or the physical center, however you want to describe that one.
Right.
And the idea through working on yourself is to be able to merge yourself with these higher centers. And the first way that happens is by the connection between the emotional centers, your lower emotional center and your higher emotional center. And when you're in certain states, you can induct the energy of that higher emotional center into your lower emotional center, and you can have energy that then can run things as long as you don't let it run amok. And all of these things are very, very, they're understood, and they're sometimes rather precise. I mean, it's like some guy who wanted to learn a particular breathing technique, a yogic breathing technique, and he kept begging this yogi to teach it to him and teach it to him. And he says, "No, I can't teach it to you. I can't teach it to you because it'll work and it'll burn you up." See, and these things have to be handled in a proper progression, because if you increase the level of your being without increasing the level of your knowledge, you become imbalanced.
Right.
Well, you become a being that's able to do certain things, but you're not smart enough to know what to do, where to do, when to do. So it's. I mean, I've given you probably as much as I can give you that's simplified, and might actually work for people without getting into a real long process of working on the self. I mean, if you want bigger and better things, you want to change your reality. Changing your reality, I should also say, is generally chaotic.
Right.
I mean, if you really want your reality changed, generally you're going to have to do something very hard and very difficult. Chaos is going to ensue, and things are going to be unsettled until they settle down into the new reality. That is merely the physical manifestation of an esoteric thing happening in your life, because you don't just get a flash of light and wake up in a new reality. It can't happen. It's extremely rare, vanishingly rare. But in the normal course of events, if you want to change your reality from one to another, you have to make a decision. You do this. Okay. And then you have, at that point, you have branching options. Okay. Which one are you going to go for? You have to make the next decision. So then you've picked this option. These other two options fade away. Okay. And then you're on this step. More options appear. And each time, and then you eventually find yourself over here where you want to be. And you started here, here at the beginning, but you haven't just, flipped. You have taken step by step by step by step there. It's we do to a great extent control our reality. And our thoughts are very much involved, because your thoughts are involved in making those choices, making those decisions that take you step by step to that new reality. But it's not just dreaming and
Transfer complete.
oops, sorry.
I was going to say, what was that?
I have a system where people send me files, and
Oh, very cool.
I just received a file.
That's all.
Laura,
good.
I did want to ask you with this, because I think you had mentioned this some in your book. From I guess it'd be more of like a physical level. Do you think the creating of a lack? So if you are saying like, hey, I'm poor and I want to be rich, and you put this being rich on a pedestal, it reinforces your current state because you're separate from that. And does that perpetuate even more? So do you think that someone that's focusing on something that they're not all the time, it actually reinforces their current state more than it brings them forth to the state that they think they want to be in?
Sure, because that's one of the principles of like hypnotherapy. I mean, you keep telling somebody, you will be, or you da da da. That's all. The subconscious mind is absolutely literal. When you say
Right.
you will be, then the subconscious mind says, I'm not now.
Right. That's exactly right. Right.
And then what I'm not now is and also is, once again, it's involved with choices, and very often these choices are emotion-driven choices. If you allow limiting emotions to drive your choices, you'll end up wherever.
That's why conscious word languaging is such an important thing for people that are truly, attempting to manifest and grow. I mean, obviously it's the inner work, but I mean, you think about people who constantly use the words could, should, would, try, I hope.
Yeah. I mean, and you can analyze language and listen to people, and I don't think I was ever much of a could, would, should. I was like you, though. I was pretty OCD for a long time. I had to control everything. And while I was controlling everything was out of control.
Exactly. Especially my emotions, or I'm sure you were the same way, because you're just like.
Yeah. And as soon as I exerted control over my emotions, that was actually the first step.
Right.
Exerted control over my emotions. And I said, I'm not going to do that. I'm going to do this logical thing here instead. And it was hard.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, that was the first step of my changing my reality. It was not giving into emotional choices. but being logical. And I had a friend who was with me at the time, and she said to me, she says, make your list, read it every
That's
day,
awesome.
because when you start feeling emotional and want to go back to where you were, because it was familiar, it was comfortable, you knew it. She says, read your list while you're doing it. So
Do you think, I mean, this is an honest question. And by the way, I think it was in book 2 where you were talking about PMS,
yeah,
and that's a very profound, uh, anecdotal story about women who have to experience this, and how they have to make a conscious choice to realize that they can either become emotional about it every single month of their life and let it literally, like you say, control their life, control their reality, or to be logical about it and say, okay, these are hormonal experiences that all women or female creations have to experience, and so you can choose your reality around it. But my question around this is it harder for women to actually be logical because of that?
I think it could be so. Yeah, it could definitely, because I mean, men, I don't think can even understand. Well, some men can understand because they live with a woman, and they they can't get inside it, but
Right.
and if they have compassion, they I mean, like I said, my husband always tracked my periods on an Excel database. He knew what was going on.
Right.
And he knew to be really, really sweet to me. Part of it.
Right.
So
But I mean, I think to what you're saying, though, to that, all joking aside, it does take a very strong and powerful, empowered woman to choose to be logical at the time that they're supposed to be emotional or driven to be emotional.
oh yeah. And well, the reason I used the example is that the women understand emotional mess ups in their lives, because they know that, well, last week I had my period, and I was a basket case, I was crying, or everything he said to me, was setting me off. And so, now I realize what an idiot I was. Women have that insight because of that experience. And men also have hormonal,
Sure.
emotional situations, maybe not the same way or the same type or the same extent, but because they don't have this exaggerated example every month for all of their reproductive years, they never think about it. They never
Mhm.
stop and think, well, I am reacting emotionally because, um, let's face it, I mean, testosterone can make you react very emotionally.
For sure.
And it can make you make very poor decisions, and you have to be able to control that. So, I mean, I am not one of those who believe in toxic masculinity. I think, men should be men and women should be women, because that's what they are. But they should know each other's weaknesses and strengths. I mean, yeah. So it's um, it's an example, an exaggerated
Yeah.
caricature, but men can understand that they have emotions too that they need to watch for and to control for and to master.
Right. Yeah. And I think that really, I mean, this is a very profound conversation around just what we're talking about right now, but I think it really is like the great control lever for individuals when you can take ownership and be fully accountable for everything that happens to you from a standpoint of like how you respond or how you react. And obviously emotionality is normal reaction or reactivity, but choosing to respond out of love or choosing to respond consciously from a standpoint of awareness is the great mover and shaker, I think, for humanity. And I think a lot of souls, bodies, it takes a long time to actually get to that point where you don't fly off the handle or move around or change or freak out. You know what I mean? And it's a conscious choice. I mean, it absolutely is a conscious choice to get to that place. But I mean, a lot of people, Laura, struggle with that.
Well, it's not just flying off the handle. Sometimes just minor irritation
Right.
can cause a lot of problems. I'll never forget. I was reading this book, Heading Toward Omega, and it was some study about near-death experiences and people who'd had these near-death experiences and what they saw during them and sharing their stories. And this one guy, went to a bad place and he felt really, really bad. And then all of this stuff, like a movie, ran before his eyes. And he saw what was making him feel bad was because he was he was a jerk, and he was always, being nasty to people in a casual way, uh, and hurting their feelings. And these were the things that were piling up against him rather than any big decision he ever made in his life. It was all the small hurts that he inflicted on
Mhm.
very often, even people he didn't know, just like being nasty to a server in a restaurant was one of the things, but the dynamic between him and his wife or whatever, didn't weigh so heavily because that was something that was more involved. It was his casual cruelty that counted the most. So, being irritable. And I've always thought about that, since I read it. I said, whenever you meet somebody, try to be nice, go a mile.
Well, what's actually amazing about that is, you guys had your session recently, which Hunter and I read yesterday, and literally, I'm reading this from the session. The Dancing Past the Dark, Distressing Near-Death Experiences by Nancy Evans Bush. What influences the variability of near-death experiences? And in particular, why do some people have disturbing experiences? And the answer from the C's was, no matter where you go, there you are. How profound is that?
I don't know if it's profound, but it's accurate, I think. So, yeah, no matter where you go, there you are.
Yeah.
Well, that's a good question I just thought of too, Laura. I don't know if the C's have talked about this, but near-death experiences, is that actual death that person is experiencing that we're all going to experience, or is that some sort of like in between state that only those people experience that we won't when our physical vessel expires?
I think that, yeah, the C said something about it. We were talking about it on a couple of occasions. Some people sleep. It depends on your condition at death, depends on your beliefs, depends on a lot. And the C's once said that if you have no expectations, you have a purer experience.
Right.
So, I often talk about I did a hypnotherapy session with a person who had a hip problem. And we did it was during the time that I was experimenting with spirit release, and I didn't tell the person, what I was going to do, but I went ahead and I started asking the sequence of questions, and come to find out that he had an attachment that, resonated with this injury, this old injury on his hip. And it was, so I started to have a conversation with the, with the entity, right? And we can reserve judgment about, any kind of whether this is true, whether it's manufactured by the person's brain to explain their problems, just set that aside. I had the conversation, and the entity said it was female and that she was afraid to go into the light because that was my objective, was to get her to, depart and leave my client alone. And why are you afraid of the light? Because I'm a sinner, so on. And she had died during a rape. She'd been raped.
Wow.
She felt that because she had died in a state of sin, that is having sex, because of course sex was very sinful, that she was damned and had to, hide from the light and hover around and, that sort of thing. And I had to, go through into some kind of like theological discussion with the entity to explain to him that that's not the way things work and so forth, finally get her off into the light. But that's the kind of thing you encounter. People get beliefs about what they are going to experience or expect when they pass out of their body, and they might get exactly that. I mean, if they think that they're damned, no matter what, they're going to have a bad experience. And then they end up being, attracted to some poor guy walking by who's got some kind of frequency vibration going on his hip that kind of is a match, and they just, glom on, and that's it. So, yeah.
Which even thus furthers the point of you create your reality. If that's the belief set, like the belief center that you're carrying around, it's not only in this life that it echoes through into, I guess, I don't know if the astral realm would be the right word, but it does, like, I guess, reverberate across densities.
Yeah. I mean, all minds are connected in some way. Not quite, and I'm working on a series of articles right now that I'm gonna explain all of that. I'm posting on my husband's website because he asked me to write about some stuff. It keeps his readers occupied while he's working on his math. So yeah, so I'm working on that. There is definitely a way that we are all connected, and I would like to pin it down in fairly exact terms so that it can be explained easily to people. And maybe by doing that, then we'll have a better idea how to work with it. I mean, you don't know how to work with something if you don't know what it is.
To that point, and this is a random, although you did ask Hunter this question off of that, as how we are all connected as one. So Hunter recently with me did the toad, which is the 5-MeO, but the Sonoran desert toad. While we were in Mexico, we did a ceremony on the beach with a quote unquote shaman, and we, inhaled it through a bong or whatever. But I've done it a number of times in my life. It was his first experience, but it does, for whatever it does, it puts you in the zone of consciousness where you feel like you're connected to everything. And I know that there are some people that have done it and they get a bad experience, but like, I don't recall, and obviously I'm not as familiar with the C sessions as some of the other people that are in your audience and stuff like that. But what are the C's thought processes on plant medicine? Entheogens is what they're really called. What is happening when you use those substances? Have they ever talked about that?
Yes. You're not going to like it.
It's all bad.
Well, they call it a self-violation. That if you induce something like that with an external chemical,
Yeah.
that means that you're not producing it inside your own body from natural processes that you can initiate, and then it becomes a self-violation, and it can impede your progress, but not necessarily. I mean, I wouldn't get all tied up in knots about it, and the thing was it came up in a discussion of melatonin because the C's, encourage the use of melatonin.
Yeah.
And there are a lot of reasons to use it. And they pointed out that the distinction was that melatonin is manufactured by the body.
Mm-hmm.
And the thing is that when you're using things that are not manufactured by the body, it's kind of like the same problem you get with, say, adenosine. It attaches to your receptors, or caffeine attaches to the adenosine receptors,
right,
and blocks the adenosine, but then the caffeine doesn't have the full characteristics of the adenosine, so you get an artificial, awakefulness because it's preventing the adenosine from binding, and you don't get the full benefit. So we would imagine that plant chemicals or things that are from outside the body can do the same thing. At the same time, there are plants that are healing because they interfere or they bind or they block other things. But in terms of changing your consciousness, when you start messing around with your brain and the consciousness connection, then you can cause problems.
Yeah. It's interesting because I've never done anything else other than 5-MeO, and every time that I've done it, it's been very healing, very cathartic. And I don't do it to seek out like any sort of high or feeling from it. It's just, I've done it to actually show other people. And it seems like, the new age, if that's part of the new age community now, it's become like commoditized, and people are using like ayahuasca ceremonies and peyote and ibogaine and all these different things. And I always kind of joke and say, well, 5-MeO is like the one thing that puts you into the source field faster than anything else. And you don't purge and vomit and deal with all these other different things and, have shadow work and all this other stuff that goes on. But I can see why they would say that, because it's however you want to look at it, it's an artificial, creation, rather than something that you could do from meditation or really deep spiritual, processes of inner work, whether it was fasting for 30 days or, there's other ways to do it. So, I mean, I would understand why they would say that. I would be interested though in their actual, if you guys could ever ask them a question about the toad and why that is. Like, why is it that thing produces what it produces?
I'll have to look into it because I don't know anything about it.
Yeah.
They have mentioned that the use of psilocybin, is that it?
Yeah. Psilocybin mushrooms.
For depression can be beneficial, it can,
Mm-hmm.
but not any prolonged use, but like a kind of a therapeutic dose.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
so hang on here and I'll.
Well, doesn't it, in relation to that, doesn't it get back to the conversation or the statement that the difference between a pill and a poison is the dosage? So whether or not someone's using something, pharmaceutically all the time versus recreationally to overcome depression or overcome some form of trauma or something like that.
Yeah. And sometimes people are depressed simply because they're chemically imbalanced. And in those cases, another chemical can, give them a physiological kick in the seat of the pants to get them over on the other side of the line. And sometimes people get stuck in places. And I mean, it's like the same thing with like pain. You get stuck in pain and you just keep saying, "Oh, I'm not going to take anything. I'm not going to take anything. I'm not going to take anything." But then taking something would be the best thing you could do because it would break that cycle.
Mm-hmm.
I read something the other day where they said people taking pain relievers, it's supposed to be bad for them because it reinforces the pain, and I don't believe that at all. I don't think that's true.
Well, Hunter, you could talk a little bit about your experience or whatever if you want, but I mean, there's another point that we could just relate to it, or I think is a perfect offshoot of this, and this is the statement. And I'm pretty sure this is from the last book, but it's also from book 1. But there's no such thing. Explain the statement. There's no such thing as source, because as the Cassiopaeans have said, we are prime creators. So, I mean, this is it's not far out there, but obviously, for people that are quote unquote of a spiritual nature and believe in God and source creator or whatever, not the the Abrahamic religious teachings of God, the external judging God in the sky, but just as some form of source consciousness or creation force, if there is that thing. Like, how do we relate that statement to that topic?
Well, because we are all of it. I mean, if Philip Goff, no, it's not Philip Goff, it's Bernardo Castro, philosopher, has had an interesting way of explaining it that I read recently, and I had to laugh when I read it. But he used the example of people with multiple personality disorder, or dissociative identity disorder is what it's really known as an example of how we are part of all, because, and he used the example of how these, personalities in a person with DID, they would be, totally discrete and individual. And in one case, one of the personalities was blind. And, they tested them while that personality was in control and they really were blind. And then as soon as the other personality that was sighted came back into control, then the brain areas that were involved with sight lit up again. The one that was, there was one that was diabetic. One personality was diabetic, the other personalities were not, and the body would fully manifest all of the conditions that were tested through blood samples for being diabetic. But when the non-diabetic personality came back into control, all of that went away. So he was saying, just imagine, all it is, and then it has an initial split, and then more splits, and then multiple, right down to the point where each and every one of us, our consciousness is a part of, is one of the personalities, but just like with DID, we are individual and distinct and unique, but we are still part of the same, basic person. So I think that's kind of like a fun way to look at it. And I think it's probably as close to the truth as we're going to get. I mean, I think that there's the one at 7th density, then at 6th density, there's like, multiple splits that are into like idea centers.
Mm-hmm.
And some of, half of those are procreative and the other half are anti-creative. And then they kind of come down like the little diagram that we were looking at. It's very, very simplistic, but imagine it multiplied, a bazillion times for each individual. So, the seeds have said that the human race, I mean, we were asking questions about Lucifer.
Right.
And they said, that's you. You're the human race is fallen. You are Lucifer.
Right.
That means a large inclusive being that splits into millions, if not billions, of individual, identities. And that's another part of it. But we're at the stage where we are like split off from one being. And I'm sure that there are different individual groups of people on, in the universe or on Earth or whatever that are parts of other great beings. Ra called them social identity complexes. And that's kind of like as good a term as any. And when people kind of get together and especially if they get together with the people who are members of their specific social identity complex, one would imagine that they can do some very interesting things. We do some experiments with that sort of thing in some of our meetings. And, like I'll get 100 people and put them under hypnosis. And we go into a hyperdimensional state and start doing visualizations and making experiments with looking at things and doing things. And it's very interesting, So
would we be to that point? Would we be a social identity complex, meaning advanced, awakened, aware souls, in 3rd density right now?
I think we're working towards it. We're still in the realm of confusion, all of us,
Right.
And we're still working on overcoming that confusion, and to become. I don't even think you go into that state immediately upon elevation to 4th density. I think that that's something that comes over time. And then at that point, maybe you move on to become like a 5th or 6th density soul. So, yeah, I think we're just working on trying to get our average above 51% of. Yeah, if we can be 51% good, but the good thing about being on the positive pathway is that, if you are involved with a group, all of the achievements of the group are part of your achievements, because of the connection with them. So you don't have to be so perfect that, that you can no longer live in this world. On the other hand, on the negative side, you have to be really, really, really negative to graduate negatively. I mean,
that's where I was just going to go. That's where I was literally just going to go. So this is segueing so perfect. So I wrote this down. I'm just going to read it to you, and then I want you to respond. What is the realm border crossing, just for people that don't know what it is? I mean, again, this audience, by the time they get to hear where we're at now, I think is going to understand, but you can say it. And then to what you just said, how do 3rd density service to self beings? is the word ascend the right word into fourth density service to self, which is really a nasty place, versus service to self. I'm sorry, versus service to others, third density service to others, ascending into fourth density as a service to others candidate. So it seems to me that's where you were just about to talk about it, but I wanted to set it up for the audience.
Well, I'd say that we're candidates here.
Right.
Candidates. If we actually, because of a network or because of some really fluky, weird, vanishingly rare, exceptional goodness and purity, which almost doesn't exist,
Yeah.
managed to make it to fourth density, then we begin to interact in our kind of like, it's almost like a separate universe from the STS forces, not precisely, but it's a separate segment of the universe. And then they begin to become more and more refined, and they continue to do work interacting with third density. And as I understand it, that they reincarnate into fourth density. That it's it's semi-physical. What is these things? Semi-physical, paraphysical
Yeah.
realm, so that it's not strictly 100% physical, and it's not like fifth density, where people go and they go through like a daily life. I mean, I've heard people describe their life in the afterlife. Well, we live on a farm, there are fields and flowers, et cetera, and how wonderful it all is, I don't think it's like that. I think that we are actually in the process of experiencing some of these changes here and now. At least some people are. I mean, I know that I live in a reality that is so different from what the rest of the world live in that there is not even any comparison. I mean, I look out at it, and I in the same way that you can be third density and interact with second density, animals,
Right.
plants, and so forth. But you don't partake of their perceptions any longer. I mean, you can imagine them and you can describe them and you can analyze them and so forth, but you are not there any longer. And fourth density, I think, is orders of magnitude greater than the third density is to second density. But still, we are experiencing, we are seeing, these things happening. We are in the middle of the wave.
Right.
And remember when I said, changing realities is chaotic? Well, that's what we're in the middle of. We're in the middle of the chaos that will bring about a new reality. And let's face it, macrocosmic changes have historically been chaotic and violent.
Right.
And I think it's part of the economy of the universe that a lot of people will die. And a lot of people will die because they are not ready.
They're not. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, that's a question though around that then. So do the less aware people go before the more aware people do?
Not necessarily, no. Sometimes more aware people go because they already know this one and they don't need to learn it. So you can't make a judgment like that because every situation is absolutely individual.
Mm-hmm.
I think that in the situations of extreme violence where mobs are involved or people are involved in things that are reprehensible, etc., I think that, we can say that the less aware. I mean, the Seas have even talked about soul smashing, that some people's souls will be smashed and they will be returned to primordial matter. It's variable and there's all kinds of things going on. It's not, maybe someday is the best way to know is to read all the sessions, because
Right.
pick up a little bit here, a little bit there, because we're never intelligent enough to get a project to cover it. And the C's are so demanding about us doing our own work.
Right.
I mean, they make us, do our own work and think about things and work on things. And I mean, it's not one of those interactions where you become weak and ignorant because you're just relying on a source to give you all the answers. No, you got to go out there and dig for it. But no, we are in the middle of the wave. And there are people who are going to be soul smashed because things are going to happen that are going to be violent and chaotic.
Yeah.
And then at the same time, the C's have said, what a glorious way to go to fourth density. I mean,
Right.
so
do you think then, and I don't mean to cut you off because this is amazing, but do you think then that your vibratory frequency, again, they call it your frequency, the FRV, the frequency resonance vibration, determines on whether or not you experience extreme violence, polarized shifts in both physical and etheric reality, or
yeah,
it just is random?
well, I think it's your FRV, because the C's have talked about, not only are you a transmitter, you're a receiver.
Right.
And I mean, they've said, receivership capability determines, how you will transition. And receivership capability depends on a lot of things, including a clean body, and by that I mean clean of chemicals and all that sort of
Right.
thing. And that's part of it. Also, your mental processes, your thinking, your emotional processes, how crystallized you are as an individual. Are you the same individual at all times, in all cases, with all people? Most people are not.
Right.
So
That's the one thing. That's the one thing that I can say that I am. I am authentic, transparent, and no filter with everyone.
well, being authentic and transparent isn't necessarily the criteria. It's being
I understand.
yeah, it's a little bit more complicated than that, but that's getting close.
Yeah. No. I mean, I just say that because, like, I don't care. Right. Like, I've lost a lot of family members, friends, people in my circle because I'm like, it is what it is. I mean, and not to rabbit hole off this because I think this is really deep. And Hunter, please, expound on this, but like, it's really hard reading your book because I'm almost finished now with Paul DeMark. And when you know the truth shall set you free, but you cannot converse with people who are so steeped in the nonsense / whatever you want to call it, the ideology of, Abrahamic religious teachings, who cannot at all accept a divergent viewpoint.
Well, let me ask you, Hunter, you read it all the way through. Do you think you'd be able to sit down and talk religion to somebody?
It's funny. I was actually telling Jay this. I did this past week with two friends who I would say more or less are like probably Christians in the traditional sense. And I brought this up to them. And the funny thing is, I'm like, guys, you don't read books. You read the Bible over and over again, but you don't read books to like elucidate your understanding of the Bible. But I said, I introduced a lot of the concepts to them from Paul DeMark, and their response was, there's too much conflicting evidence that someone named Jesus of Nazareth walked the earth because of all the other things that I'd said. And what I told them is, you're looking at one set of evidence that was co-opted to create a narrative around that then ended up being, like you talked about last time, this meme that people create into their head that then becomes reality. And what they go back to, I think, when I look at people like that, because I know people in my family like this and friends, it ultimately stems back to fear, because if they have to acknowledge, like if they sat down and would actually read Paul DeMark, if they had to acknowledge the data that comes from that book and the conclusions you draw from it, it would shake the foundations of their understanding of what everything that they've been told. And a lot of people are afraid to shake those understandings because it would mean they'd have to look at other areas of their life and how they carry on other areas of their life and do a thorough examination. I think people, for whatever reason, don't want to do that. And I think also, too, they're attached to the fear of the next life, kind of like we were talking about earlier. They're attached to the fear of that. And if they do something that they think in the next life will set them up to go to the lake of fire or hell, whatever it is, they don't want to do anything here to preclude them from that. So to me, it's like, I guess I would understand in the sense of I'm open, like I'm not attached to any sort of information I'll come across my whole life that could change the course of my life, because like you said, it could change the course of my life for the better. And they're attached to the information they receive having to have a certain conclusion and outcome that keeps them from not straying too far from that, because it would shake their foundation. So I think they hear it, but they go back to these like software installation that they got at a young age or whatever age. And they're afraid that if they lose that their salvation is predicated upon them like acknowledging it.
So Laura, before you say anything, because this is so incredibly, insanely profound, my dad in our family, no, just for feedback, my dad and my family are very left brain, very erudite, very educated, academic people. So he puts in yesterday, beware today the Ides of March, the day they nailed Julius Caesar. And I wrote, you mean Jesus Christ? Now check this out. This is where it went from them. And my brother was like, what are you talking about? Huh? And I said, everything you've ever learned or really just told about Jesus is BS. And then my dad says, who is Jesus then? And I said, and then somebody else in my family said, Yeshua. And then somebody said, is that the Jewish name for Jesus? And then this is what my brother Joey, who's a very academic family member, said. And I want to read this to you. He says, no question, modern Christianity. Oh, because I said, I'm sorry, I left out, Dad, you might really like this book. And then I gave him the Amazon link to your book. And then he said, my brother Joey said, no question, modern Christianity was engineered in many ways. We don't know much about who wrote the Gospels, nor how the works of the New Testament and St. Paul evolved or were sourced, but we know Jesus was real. And we know he stated unambiguously he was the Son of God, which invites the old C.S. Lewis line, he was either a liar, a lunatic, or the Lord.
Oh, Lord.
Yeah.
Well, I will just point out, and I think you're aware of this, what I undertook to do with this book was to do a serious historical study using strict historical methods, which nobody in biblical research really does. I mean, mainstream biblical research. And important in historical research is chronology. What came first? What came next? What came next? And then if you follow it, you see the progression. You see how it all happened. The earliest thing first, and then the next thing, then the next thing. And you have to use all kinds of tools, to kind of tease that out. But once you do that and you see the progression, then you see that, well, that's obviously how it happened, because it couldn't happen any other way. So, so these people that talk about, all the multiple witnesses, like, Bart Ehrman, calling the four Gospels four independent witnesses. And yet when you do analysis of the text, you see that Mark was first, Matthew was second, Luke was third, John was, not even in the race. But and you see how they used Mark. And then you also understand that Paul was first before any of the Gospels. So once you understand, and if the Bible was even arranged as it ought to be chronologically, I mean, the New Testament, you would see that. But
that's the other thing too, is most Christians are so far gone. They don't even understand that Paul's writings were well before any of the gospels were even pieced together. But then you go one level deeper in your book where you actually, to me, your book was like this big bulletin board. You ever see like in the crime shows where they have the bulletin board and there's like pinpoints with like tic tac or tacks, and they've got the strings going everything. It was like that because you have Josephus, then you have Pontius Pilate, then you have Paul, then you have the gospel writings and everything. And what you did through like connecting all those strings and everything was you showed the timelines were completely invalidated from what people think actually happened. So by default, you couldn't have this guy named Pontius Pilate and this guy named Jesus of Nazareth that did this thing. And then Paul had his, revelation and everything on the timeline that it was supposed to have happened. So even if you took everything else out of the equation and you just had that, you would say, okay, well, this is invalidated because of this. And then you could take it another level deeper and you have Judas the Galilean, this person that was doing this and was going on at this time. So, but it's just tough because I don't know if it goes back to fear, that people fear for their next life, because I've just seen so many people, rest in peace to my grandmother, but she was, I think through her life, she died last year. She was like a very strong Christian, but she wasn't always that way. Like she grew up, in a Christian household. And I think she would say like her faith took hold like later in life, but she always would say it's fire insurance to me, because she was more scared of going to hell than she was excited to go to heaven.
My mom was the same way, Hunter, as you know. My mom died of COVID last year, Laura. She was 77, 78. She really died of being inflamed, obese, insulin resistant, all those things. And of course, they labeled it COVID so that the hospital could get paid. But my sister literally told me, because she was with her at death, and I was in Mexico at the time, still living there, but that she was afraid of going to hell. She literally was afraid of going to hell.
There's a lot of the fear of hell industry, out there.
Right.
I mean, it's an industry because that's how you get followers and that's how you get believers and so on and so forth. So, but anyhow, let me stop you for 1 second. I was pulling up here on my other screen, this thing about hallucinogens.
Perfect.
And let me read it to you real quick because it's short. My question was, I was talking to the C's. I want you to know that you have lost a fan because he was not happy with what he considered to be internal inconsistencies, in that you were not favorably disposed toward hallucinations produced by substances such as mescaline and ayahuasca, but yet you recommend melatonin because it is a hallucinogen. Then you said that spiritual powers could not be obtained through chemicals or plant-type means, but then said that melatonin exercises psychic abilities. Could you comment on this? And here's their answer. Several comments. First of all, fan is short for fanatic. Gotta love them. Secondly, melatonin does not force an alteration in physiological brain chemicals, as do mescaline, peyote, LSD, etc. Accessing the higher levels of psychical awareness through such processes is harmful to the balance levels of the prime chakra. This is because it alters the natural rhythms of psychic development by causing reliance on the part of the subject, thus subjugating the learning process. It is a form of self-imposed abridging of free will. Melatonin simply allows the system to clear obstructions in the brain chemistry naturally, thereby allowing the subject to continue to learn at a natural pace. And it is by no means unimportant that melatonin is a natural body hormone. The other substances mentioned are, at least in part, synthetic, with the exception of peyote. But even that is not a natural ingredient of the human physiological being. And besides, we have already discussed the importance or lack thereof of those who pass judgment upon this exercise or communication.
So you definitely have to ask him about 5-MeO because it's of the toad. But yeah, I mean, the point still stands. Wow. I mean, to me,
well,
to
it's
get
so,
an answer like that is
Laura,
like,
that's really interesting because in the last couple of years and some of the work we've done in the health space, first of all, fluoride calcifies the pineal gland, which suppresses melatonin production. and impairs melatonin production from the pineal gland. But also, too, we've come across work from researchers and doctors
Doris
that
Law.
actually, that will megadose melatonin in order to help immune system function. But but in doing so, it enhances like psychic function and enhances the dream state because, we're probably not experiencing the same melatonin levels that, our grandfathers and their grandfathers had because of the oxidative stress that goes on with the pineal gland that suppresses that. And so that's why there's certain peptides that help with melatonin production. Taking melatonin itself is so important. So,
Well, are you familiar with the work of Doris Law? I'm sure Gabby is.
Doris who?
Doris Law. She's a Chinese researcher. She's like the world's second or third most researched melatonin researcher. She's actually a friend of mine. I've done she won't do any podcast with anybody on the planet except me. It's pretty amazing. But I actually never met her in person. She was living in Mexico when we first connected in COVID during 2020, but she saved literally millions of people because she was the person that first came out and said melatonin at high dosage would help people, because at the very beginning of COVID, when they thought that it was about, they needed to intubate people to clear, breathing pathways. And then they found out that intubation was death, that it was because obviously COVID or whatever COVID was robbing oxygen, in the cells. And so she was like, well, high dose melatonin is a very powerful redox molecule. And so it will help. But anyway, long story short, she has a bunch of people in her ecosystem that take 3 grams of melatonin before they go to bed. And they talk about, now they're also talking about now, as Hunter was just saying, there's a bioregulator called pineolon that obviously strengthens the pineal gland and actually helps to eliminate the retardation of the pineal gland from calcification from, all the sludge in the environment. But it's very interesting, these people that talk about taking these dosages, because they say they can actually leave their body. Their sleep is incredible. I mean, there's all sorts of stuff. I mean, I could send you more information about Doris, but she's a really, really good person, at least in my experience working with her. And it's interesting that they would talk about melatonin, the C's being in that way.
Honey, hold on 1 second. Honey, would you turn that light on over there? I had to turn this one off over my eyes because it was showering. Yeah, that's better. Now I'm a lot.
There you go.
It was the one
Better.
up here was just really going right in my eyes.
Blue light, baby.
Yeah. So yeah, they've always, there are a number of references. I think there's probably I don't remember. There are 30 references to melatonin in the sessions that I have up to date. But that one was the most interesting. And we've tried, I didn't like the high dose melatonin myself. It may have done something beneficial for me. I don't know. Did it for a while, but I was entirely too sleepy, even during the day, kind of groggy or, halfway hallucinating.
Well, how much did you take? Do you remember how much you took?
Oh Lord, we went up there.
And were you just putting it under your tongue, just like the powder underneath your tongue?
No, we had the powder and we had pills, and we were using combinations, so you could get something that was immediately active and then something that would then, kick in later on. And well, to be quite frank, it kind of messes with your libido.
Yeah. Well, for sure it does that. And I will tell you, and I'm one of these like weird, outlier non-responders, or the opposite, where the more melatonin I take, the more wired I get. Like it literally, I'm like insanely advanced to me, at least like brain wise, but like it makes me stay up more awake, and it makes my brain like speed like pick up to almost to a point where like, I don't want this. I'm not going to sleep. And that is known in the literature that there are people that the higher the dose they take, the more it works like in opposite way. So it's like and I never could understand that, because when I was a young kid and I was reading about melatonin, I would be taking 20 or 30 milligrams, which back then 25, 30 years ago was a high dose considered, and it would make me stay awake. And I was like, what in the hell is going on here?
Everybody's different,
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah, we are.
I had to quit
Yeah.
meditating because I kept leaving my body in the seas one point, that if you keep doing this, you might not come back.
Right.
And I said, well, okay, because I tend to go into the out of body state fairly quickly.
Yeah.
So I guess
Hunter, we should probably do it. We should probably do at least a couple nights of like 3 grams and see what happens.
Yeah, it's interesting with me. The lower doses make me groggy, but the higher doses I actually sleep good when I've done the higher dose one. So I don't know. It's interesting. I don't use it all the time, but I'll do it like periodically. But like lower dose, I wake up groggy, and then when I've done the higher dose, I wake up and I feel more refreshed. So
I found I have to vary it, because if you take the same thing all the time, your body just gets used to it.
Builds up tolerance. Yeah.
Yeah. So I change up.
All right. So we'll pick up. I want you to, if you're okay with it, just for, maybe 5 or 10 more minutes, and then we'll pick up tomorrow. And today's session's been incredible, but, what do the Cassiopaeans say about AI? And by the way, before you answer, because, you and I have been talking about in emails about Elon, this whole truck thing is just exposing him at this point now.
What?
I mean, well, so first off, it's whatever his truck, whatever the truck is for Tesla, whatever it's called, Hunter, I don't know what it is, but there's a lot of people.
Ugly thing that he made.
Yeah, the retarded. Yeah, but so now it rusts. So there's massive lawsuits out there. Can you imagine buying a truck that rusts in the rain? Right? An all-TV or an all-terrain vehicle like it's proposed to be, where people can like be extremists and live in it and all this stuff. And now they're even selling like all sorts of like paraphernalia around how you can live in the remote wilderness and put a tent or a teepee or whatever on it. But then the other thing is the bulletproof thing, because Max sent an email today, he advertises bulletproof. And so all these guys are out there getting it and testing it, and it's not bulletproof. So obviously the question is, what does the C say about AI? Is there any positive element or aspect of AI?
Well, I don't know if we've actually asked specifically about AIs. It seems like we have. I'd have to search the sessions, pull them up. But the one thing I remember is back in 1996 or 97, some questions were asked about alien invasion and so forth. And she said something about, that computers would take over and control us. And then we were asking about, the beasts of Revelation, 666. And they also said there that there was going to be a computer that could, basically control everybody on Earth, and they were going to do it through a monetary control system. Jay disappeared. So, controlling travel and money and so forth. And so basically, as far as AI is concerned, I would suggest, but I'd have to search for it, that AI is it may try to take things over, but we already know to a certain extent how that will be, because way back in the old days when I worked for the welfare system in Florida, we switched over to the computerized distribution or dispersal, and that meant every case had a data entry operator had to put everything, fill in all these codes on these forms and put it in the computer. And when the day came to issue like food stamps, the first day of the month, and there would be like lines outside the building, all the way all down to the end of the building, around the corner and around the other side, across the parking lot, whatever. And then the computer went down. And you can't issue. And And I'm sure you had the experience of talking to a computer when you're trying to talk to your bank.
Oh yeah.
Well,
all the time.
press 6, press 5 if you this, you know, blah, blah, blah. And I mean, those are ways the computers already control us now. Just bump that up to where the computer is actually making the decisions at the top level instead of just being, you know, kind of like a program thing. But they're making and I mean, they can decide that human beings are irrelevant and need to be done away with and do it fairly quickly. So, you know, it's but interestingly, when I was writing today, I was writing a little bit about artificial intelligence, and philosopher Philip Goff calls it functional intelligence, as opposed to experiential intelligence, which is what comes with consciousness.
Yeah.
And he, the idea was way back when, you know, Alan Turing was around, was that he made what they call the Turing test. And if the person is sitting there and he's got two people he's talking to behind a screen and he doesn't know, you know, one is human and one is a computer, can he tell which is which? See, and if he can't, then the computer passes the test, right? And so people, you know, kind of objected to this a little bit. So he redefined intelligence to be functional intelligence, you know, if it can function, you know, systems and so forth. So intelligence has even been redefined, and how well human beings function as a system is highly questionable, because what we were talking about earlier, you know, people make emotional decisions, not logical decisions. And how easy is it going to be for a computer to say, you know, that's not logical, you know, you're out. Boom. And I mean, you get a scene like in the Matrix movie, you know, where the person is in the pod, you know, and they got all these things plugged into them, you know, keeping their illusions alive, and then the system figures out that they're doing something wrong and unplugs them and dumps them out the drain into the sewer. So I don't think it's that simple. I don't think they're going to dump us into the sewer. I think they'll just euthanize us. And I mean, come on, we're already starting to do that. People in control of governments are operating on functional intelligence, not experiential intelligence. I mean, look at Canada, you know, you have a problem, you call somebody for help and they say, oh, would you like to be euthanized? You know, what kind of, that's AI in a sense, but it can get a lot worse. And then look at the example of this Google AI system that can't produce a picture of a white person, you know, shows Vikings as black people. I mean, look at that ridiculously absurd romance novel series that was put up on Netflix about all the lords and ladies and dukes and duchesses, whatever, in merry old England during the Regency period, played by black. I mean, that's not historically accurate, but truth is irrelevant.
Right.
So if you have an AI system to whom truth is irrelevant and they can be programmed that way, obviously they're not that smart. If that AI system that Google has was that stupid, then we got a problem.
That's the interesting thing, is I don't think it's actually that smart, even though there's very scary stuff around it. Jay and I have talked about this before. Do you think the AI is prepping for, call it, we'll just say fourth density? Maybe it's reptilian, maybe it's, you know, some other fourth density being. Do you think it's a way, because they're not able to hold form in third density? Do you think it's an extension arm of their invasion into this density to be able to control this density more and eventually squash humanity and squash,
Oh yeah, that's
you know,
a good
human consciousness?
I like that idea. That's great. I think that it's entirely possible, because I mean, when we were talking about the Lizzies in the 666 session, they pretty clearly said that. Let's see if you can get that out.
Well, Or what's his name? Leo Zagami says that it's all Jesuit predictive programming, but obviously we know that the lizards control all of the secret societies at this point, based on what you've declined or figured out in the wave and what the seas have said. So it would stand to reason that all of these people in this under this mind control, call it, of Jesuit predictive religious programming, that's what they're creating. That's the reality that is being created, so that the Lizzies can eventually run the ship or run things from both third and fourth density. It's crazy to actually think about it, because there's this guy. I know you're on Twitter. I need to start talking to you more on Twitter, but there's this guy called Donnie Darkened on Twitter.
Donnie, who?
Donnie Darkened. I'll send you his Twitter address, but he has really profound, I will literally call it profound. I mean, it's almost like he's reading the future himself, and I literally think he's like some sort of third density unwitting stooge of them, but he's talking about what's happening in the geodidetic climate of politics and all the BS. And a lot of people are following this dude on Twitter now. And it's like, it seems like he is part of that Jesuit predictive programming. And it's like, if you follow it, right, as a religious person, and you think of the end times and the apocalypse and, all these different things, what are they, the rapture and all this stuff, it's like you're manifesting that reality if you're in fear of that reality becoming true.
Yeah. Well, he said that the reason for all of the changes was because, what could they say here? So they're afraid of what's coming. Yeah, I can't see it exactly. And they said that that things will get more chaotic as the change intensifies. The changes intensify because they're afraid of losing control, and so it makes sense for them to, utilize AI, computer systems, bank systems. What really worries me is the use of like vaccines to implant things in people's bodies that make them more controllable.
Right.
That's kind of scary. And then there's also parasitical infections that can make you more controllable. I mean, if you've read anything about toxoplasmosis, I mean, that stuff's creepy.
That's nuts. Yeah.
So there's all kinds of ways that they're using to control us. And I don't think, well, yeah, they talk about implanting things in your skin and like on your hand but I don't think we need to get as literal as that, because they can easily control everybody even without that.
Well, I mean, that goes back to like in 2020 and 2021 when they were doing the COVID tests, when they were jamming shit up people's noses and they were scrapping around, screeching around. I mean, what the hell kind of nanotechnology, plasmology stuff are they inserting into people's, sinus cavities?
Well, I wouldn't necessarily think they're inserting anything, but that's not to say that some of them aren't.
Right.
But
right.
It's dangerous to be poking those long sticks up your nose. You could pop something. Yeah. It's AI is is very problematical as a tool for gathering and collating information. I think it's unsurpassed. It's tremendous. I mean, Musk said something the other day about using his Grok to read through bills that are brought up in Congress and condense them down to what essentially is inside them, so that people can be aware. I think that would be a tremendous use of it. Reading through all kinds of literature and assessing things, establishing chronologies and so forth would be tremendous. But the problem is, I think if there is the more we get mechanized, the more mechanical we become.
Yeah.
So
I think that goes to the idea of the experiential intelligence. One thing Jay and I were actually talking about earlier this week is what I love so much about reading in books is that all three of us could read one book and we could all three have different insights that when we come back to each other and share together, help me understand the book better and then help you understand the book better. And then we create a new knowledge set that took that one book and now like adds insight and color to it to help us understand an interpretation of it better. But if you have people that are using an AI to do the reading for them, that's now doing that, they all get synced up into thinking one certain way, which is the way that the AI thinks things. So it's only the functional side and not the experiential side.
But I also realized not everybody can read the way I read. I have read a book a day, almost every day for the last 60 years.
Amazing.
So I don't know how many that is. If you have,
It's a lot.
well, if you have, I don't know, with
Be 1.8 million.
it says, I think 21,900, almost 22,000. 22,000. So, not everybody can do that. And they can't all remember that stuff. And then they can't, put it together. So, that's one of the reasons I wrote The Wave. The Wave was a product not only of the Seas material, but a product of my experience and a product of this vast amount of reading I had done. And I would just, pull things together, like you said, on your crime board. You got the central crime here in the middle, and then you've got all the things that connect to it and how they connect, and put it all together so that a person who reads The Wave can probably get the benefit of about at least 5,000 books. Yes, and
One thing I wanted to ask you with your writing, because you probably read several thousand books before you ever published your first book. To go back to where we were talking to earlier with the reality creation, and then also becoming a fourth density candidate, do you think the creative process has changed the reality that you live within, so much so that, like you were saying, that the reality that we really all three experience is so far removed from 95% of the world that it's like we don't experience the same things? Do you think there's something that connects the creative pursuit of writing, reading, producing material to basically creating that section of reality that you carve out for yourself that we could argue, I guess, is maybe closer to becoming a fourth density candidate?
It's like a conduit. You write about the conduits. That's essentially what you're doing.
It's a really good point, because I've thought that myself. I have thought, that all the work we've done, like all our networking, people in our groups, things we work on researching, writing, are living here. We have other groups that live in networked facilities, in different places around the world, and they experience different realities. And I think that it is part of the creation of a larger reality. And of course, these sessions or these meetings that I have with group members around the world, where we actively seek to explore these other realms, and to try to have a beneficial effect on the planet and then on ourselves and each other. That's also part of it, and all of it hopefully will coalesce at the point in time that things are necessary. We are sending out a signal by doing that. We are also increasing our receivership capabilities. And those are the important things. What you say, it's not who you are, it's not where you are, it's who you are and what you see. And seeing means seeing the unseen. I mean, it's seeing in the sense that Paul, the Apostle Paul, understood seeing, that you see the reality of the eternal verities, not the reality of today. And the whole thing that was supposed to be depicted by the crucifixion, it was supposed to be an example of a man who saw a higher reality and was faithful unto death, because he believed in what he saw more than what was around him, the lies and deceptions. And he went to his death because he saw this higher reality. That was the example that was supposed to be being set by that. So that's what it means when the Seas say, it's not where you are, it's who you are and what you see. Do you see the eternal reality do you experience it? And we experience it constantly. I mean, it's part of our lives. So,
Laura, I'm going to let you go. And this has been so profound. We'll pick up literally tomorrow. I've got a bunch of questions in my mind right now that just literally lifted off of them today. But thank you so much again, as always.
you're welcome. And thank you for talking to me. It gives me something to look forward to.